So I want you all to just visualize when you were 5 years old, how do you look? Visualize your face. Now, along with that visualization, I would like to request all of you to be that 5-year-old kid. Innocent, absolutely no fear, feel like doing whatever they want to do. Okay, now remember, all of us are 5 years old. Are you all alive?
Oh, yes.
Show me that you're alive.
All right.
Show me with your hips. Ah. Are you all alive?
Oh, yes.
Show me that you're alive.
All right.
Show me with your silence.
Welcome to the audio archive of Initiatives of Change India's Emergent Futures 2024. I'm Abril Sawarsa Rivera.
And I'm Tulika Verma.
And we'll be taking you through a sonic recap of the event. On the 18th of January, we gathered here at Asia Plateau for a 5-day conference in which changemakers and thought leaders of all kinds, historians, journalists, musicians, artists, students, lawyers, peace builders, engaged in both an inward and collective journey through the themes of reality, hope, and faith. Every day, we shared our stories over meals and plenaries, through poetry and music. We sat in nature and practiced inner listening. We spoke in big rooms and in intimate family groups. It was an interdisciplinary and global conversation in which lines were intentionally blurred between audience and speaker, operating under the belief that each one of us in the room had a story to tell. Here's Archana Rao, one of the organizers of Emergent Futures.
In community, whilst we have conversation, can we have spaces and the kind of conversations that are much greater than the sum of just two people speaking? We were very intentional to make sure, and I suspect all of you will experience this, no one was invited to speak. People and all of you were invited to be part of this conversation. And in the last week is when we started to emerge to see who might be the people who might be right for this particular audience. The honest truth is, I think every single person here has something very important to say.
To kick off the conference, we first gathered for a rousing inauguration speech from Professor Gerald Pillay, the president of IFC International. He talked about the fractures in our society today and how, in order to find our way out of them, there is a need for spiritual connection, for looking back into the richness of the past, and for collective reimagination.
Now, we, in this movement, Initiatives of Change, have one aim only, and that is to strengthen the moral and spiritual foundations of society. It's simple, but it's all-embracing. To heal the wounds of the past, to overcome the alienation of ordinary people, and to bring freedom and to make peace. That's our work in the world. And our organizers have brought together such an interesting group of people from all over. And you'll notice that the themes are reality, hope, and faith. The first is then, how do we understand together the human predicament? Reality.
And the first full day of the conference was dedicated to just this, the reality of today. We began the day with Soul Nurture led by Lena Khatri, a call to drop into ourselves and the nature around us. Participants wandered the Asia Plateau campus, finding shaded benches and trees to sit beneath and reflect for 30 minutes in silence. We then came back together as a group and shared our insights, many people speaking about the nature they'd observed around them, trees waving in the wind, the diversity of the bird calls, and then connecting these to larger reflections about themselves and the world. We heard poems in Sanskrit, reflections about the queerness of nature and the interdependence of all life, and there seemed to be an overarching sense of gratitude between the participants for our natural world and the peace it brings. Here's Dennis, the former head at BBC Radio 4, speaking on the value of inner listening.
And having moments of silence with other participants and feeling that sense of being part of a journey of exploration, of spiritual, ethical exploration into a new kind of history. But it's not an escapist thing. It's very tuned into the needs of the world.
We later moved into our first plenary, Truth About Our Realities. IFC UK Board Chair Margaret Cossens moderated the session, moving between three speakers who shared their personal and global realities. We heard from Andrea Wojner, the India resident representative and Bhutan country director for UNFPA, who spoke from a lifetime of work in population and gender inequality across the world. We also heard from Tenzin Sundu, a Tibetan poet and activist, so dedicated to liberation that he's been to jail 16 times for his non-violent resistance.
And in the recent 15 years, 155 Tibetans burnt themselves in self-immolations. I know none of you have ever heard of this, because we are from a country that is invisible to the world. And we are deeply pained that we are in a situation where entire world is taking advantage of us and they do not know where they're benefiting. And we've been in this situation for 74 years. So how do you run a freedom struggle when no one even knows about you, no one has even heard about you? And that, for me, is the challenge, and also the reality that we are talking about, and the truth that we all know and we stand for.
And finally, we got the chance to hear from Imad Karam, the executive director of IFC International, about the weight of injustice, its global implications, and the dreams that can exist beyond it. Being a Palestinian from Gaza, Imad spoke about the challenges of holding on to hope when relentless violence is occurring in his homeland. Here's Imad.
We normalize these things, we justify, we excuse them. But I just feel, because of what's happening today, Palestine is no longer a political or an economic or even a social matter. It's a moral, civilizational question.
If you were allowed to say one thing to all those gathered at Davos right now, what would you say? Our session on inner development began with this provocative question and was followed by an intentional practice of looking inwards to meet the challenges of the world. Immersing us in the core ideas of initiatives of change, this session set the tone for a commitment to authentic global change through inner transformation that carried on through the rest of the gathering. After an afternoon jam session in which participants sat in a circle with instruments and sang songs from their home countries, we moved into the final plenary of the day. we heard from Dora Lee, an American living in Athens working with a non-hierarchical collective to provide rights and resources for refugees and asylum seekers in Greece. We then heard from Fadi George, an Egyptian peace worker who travels the Middle East teaching transformational leadership. Here's Fadi.
It is not easy work. It is like the image that comes to my mind is like the work of prophets, because you are inviting people to believe in something that doesn't exist, that is not born yet, no?
Finally, we heard from Damko Wangyal, a Tibetan refugee, art therapist, and certified Zentangle teacher, and member of the core team of IFC India, who shared his life story and deep-rooted hope that he will one day return to Tibet. Here's Wangyal.
That has been my journey and reality, but right now I'm in a position where I call myself as a global citizen. Because I came here to this place as a stateless, with a lot of insecurity and doubt about Tibet, its struggle, but I realized that Tibet is the not only country who goes through difficult time. And since I care for Tibet, I also need to expand my heart to other people and community who also go through difficult time. So I made a commitment in my heart that wherever I am, I would like to work for the humanity. And this place has given me an opportunity to be part of that bigger heart, I would say.
That was Rajesh, the head chef here at Asia Plateau and a self-taught flute player, kicking off our open mic community square in which participants gathered outside on the patio for an evening of music, art and poetry. We heard from so many participants and it was a joy-filled gathering. We closed out our day of reality with a transcendent performance from the Vasu Dikshit Collective, a group of folk electronica musicians who sing in both Kannada and Hindi and bring new musical life into poems from great saints and poets such as Purandar Das and Kabir. Their performance captivated us all, with many participants getting up out of their seats and dancing together.
Our first full day was a heavy one. We moved from room to room with our eyes trained on truths that at first felt disparate and unique in their hurt. But as we shared more together, as we allowed stories of personal injustices to take up just as much space as the global ones, we began to connect the dots between all of our pain. There were patterns in its sharpness, in power dynamics, and, most importantly, in the basic desires that lay at the root of all conflict. People are hungry for home, for a land that is safe. We are hungry for love, hungry to be heard.
It was with this sense of reality and unity in experience that we woke up with our eyes wide open and ready for the next day of our journey, our day of hope. In the early morning, Archana led us through an inner listening exercise in which participants reflected on what was in their freedom glass, what were the things we needed to look at honestly about ourselves, What stories of hope do we have in ourselves that we can share with the people in the room?
Later, we walked down to Grampari, IFC India's rural development program dedicated to alleviating poverty through spirituality and rural development. Over the next few hours, we were given a tour of the center and learned about the work Grampari does in watershed and springshed development, sustainable agriculture, health and hygiene, education, and more, all with a consistent practice of inner listening. As our first speaker and Grampari founder Jayshree Rao told us,
what we've seen is a sustained behavioral change in people. There's definitely been less conflict. Women have got more importance in decision making in the villages. Violence in the villages has come down. So these we have seen over a period of 15 years because we've worked in more or less the same villages. People often ask us, why don't you go wide? In some of our programs we've gone wide, like our school hand washing with soap program. But in most of our things, we are trying to go deep with the villages.
We then heard from Deepak Jadhav about his experience as the deputy director of Grampari, from a young local farmer, Guru Datta, on his work in organic farming and forest fire prevention, as well as from local villager and Grampari staff member, Kamal Moore, who told us her story of empowerment through working for Grampari.
Namaste, my name is Kamal and I come from Godavari. I come from very difficult circumstances. We had 8 or 9 people in our family who needed to be fed and we had no means of livelihood. My father-in-law got very sick, but he couldn't get any medicine. And my mother-in-law was also supporting my father-in-law and we couldn't treat her illness. I have a son and I couldn't even continue his education after the 10th standard. He studied with other people's books and clothes. I couldn't accept the fact that he couldn't get his education. But my husband was not okay if I went out to work. He would fight if I went out to work. But when my son's education stopped, I couldn't keep quiet. I heard that at Grampari, you could get some kind of training and earnings. So I came with 5 or 6 other women. But I was really scared of what I would say. I didn't know how I'd be able to ask for work. But when we came here, we realized that you could stand on your own feet. And even if you're not educated, you could earn money. So after coming here, I started feeling some kind of hope. We started coloring lamps for Diwali, making traditional blankets, and we learned how to market these products. I started earning a little bit of money, and so I told my son to continue his education. Soon after, he became a graduate from a college in Vai and started earning 2,000 to 3,000 rupees a month. We have a 10-minute quiet time here, where we find how to resolve conflicts in our homes as well. So after that, I told my husband that instead of begging for food, why don't we really work and start living our life? So now he's become a little normal. And now he lets me work. All this because of quiet time. In 2016, my son got married. My daughter-in-law is studying until the 12th standard, and she also couldn't get educated further because she didn't have enough money. So after she married my son, I asked her if she wanted to study more, and she said, yes, I want to study.
After hearing incredible success stories from folks involved with Grampari from the surrounding rural villages, we then got to hear stories of hope from cities across the world. Moderated by Tugari Wachira from Kenya, we heard from Jacqueline Cote from Switzerland, who's the president of the Co Foundation, director of public relations, and previously head of communications at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. We also heard from Joanna Nolan, the trustee of IFC UK, about the work that she does in restorative justice training in mostly women's prisons across the UK and France.
Most women who are in prison have been abused in some way, either as a child or as an adult, generally, though not always, by a man. The official figures are around 70%, but we think it's more than that. They turn to alcohol and to drugs to deal with the mental health issues, and dull the pain. And that leads to crime, fraud, theft, violence, murder. So there are reasons for their antisocial behaviour, their addictions, for the way they are, and for what they have done. There are reasons for why we are the way we are, and excuses for why we stay that way. So we talk a lot about the difference between reasons and excuses. We seek to enable the women to see that difference, and we seek to empower them.
Billy Fitzgerald, a climate activist from Ireland, spoke to us about the urgency of his work and where he finds hope in a dying world.
In my role, I was very fortunate to travel around the world and have hundreds of conversations with and listen to hundreds of people from across the climate space, from activists to climate advocates to grassroots communities to indigenous communities, people from sort of the teaching background, the political classes, the business leaders, and all these people form this sort of grand coalition of people who are really driving the agenda towards net zero. And having these conversations and listening to these people speak, there is a real sense that they get it. People talk about people getting it. They get it. And we have to put our hope in the people who get it, and we have to get behind the people who get it.
We also heard from Tulika Verma from India, former regional head of Teach for India Hyderabad and Bangalore, who now works with organizations on leadership and impact. She spoke to us about 3 lessons she's learned in her work in education and social work. Number 1, young people need leadership opportunities in community. Number 2, our children and youth need us to trust them. And 3, the voice at the center of the movement towards a better future must be children.
Our Grand Prix visit was followed by another Creative Conversations art session in which Tessa and Matre led participants in drawing intention flags, which were then gifted to fellow participants. Later, we got to hear from Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, a historian, biographer, and lifelong peace builder. And he just so happens to be one of the founders of Asia Plateau. Here's Anand giving us an introduction to the session, Hope Today.
So we've gathered this evening over here to have a conversation with Rajmohan Uncle, as we like to call him. And it is an incredible privilege to introduce him and sit next to him. He's been working with Hope, in Hope, for probably more number of years than I've been alive. And I think that's quite an incredible thing for what he's been doing. And I wrote down a lot of things of how I should introduce him, what are the things I should say, and probably this page won't be enough. The next 1 hour won't be enough to keep saying what I need to say about him.
No one will be left in the audience.
Here's a question that Joanna posed to Uncle Rajmohan.
Are you ever afraid for the future?
Whose future?
The world's future, our future.
Yes, of course. Only about 100 times each day. Yes, the world is in a very sad state, and solidarity across national boundaries is diminishing by the month. And we feel deeply about many things. And as I said repeatedly, whenever I have the chance to say something, write something, until the end of the last century, democracy, liberty, equality, fraternity were norms that people were speaking of, even if it was often lip service, but it was sincere lip service. But now, supremacy is the preferred goal rather than democracy, equality, liberty, fraternity of many powerful groups. There is need now for some great individuals in the world, women and men, young and old, of different races and different religions, to issue a very powerful statement against hate and against fear and for truth. I think it's absolutely, it is tragic that in this day and age, when we have so many methods of communication, that the best, greatest minds of the world are not coming together to say, stop this madness. Don't intimidate, force, push, compel, coerce people. Maybe we should think of individuals in our own countries or elsewhere and see if we can think of 6, 8, 12 people and then challenge them to do something.
What a generative experience it was to hear from those incredibly accomplished people, offering their stories of hope in so many forms. We closed out the day with a sense that all the ingredients needed for real global change were right here in this room, something emerging from a divine combination of minds and action. Here are some words from Uncle Nikitu that resonated with us long after the sun set that day.
I feel that there is a slow movement starting all over the world, and people are asking the most difficult questions. Ukraine, Tibet, Palestine, and this. They ask the most difficult question, and nobody can answer that. So they are answering themselves. Deep down, say, well, I do not know how to do it, but something in my soul says, I will not accept that which is wrong. People like that are coming up like, rice seedlings beginning to sprout when the spring rain comes.
I was reminded, thinking about the conversation that we're about to have, of a book by a marvellous British historian called Theodore Zeldin. He writes about French history, but he also has written a book about conversation, which I recommend to you. And he says there that conversation is one of the central arts of living. But he says we often think that conversation is just people talking to each other or sharing their ideas. He says that conversation is itself a journey into the unknown, because true conversation always takes you somewhere that you weren't expecting and always allows room for change and for growth. So let's see where this takes us.
That was Dennis. To begin our day of faith, we moved from a morning inner listening session led by Christine and Archana into the first plenary, Faith, in conversation with Nikitu Iralu and Dennis Nolan. Nikitu has spent a lifetime doing peace-building work through reason and dialogue in his homeland of Nagaland, India, a lifetime of taking extraordinary leaps of faith, while Dennis has lived and worked in the UK as a senior producer at the BBC and as a leadership coach. During the session, we got to be a fly on the wall for a generative conversation that spanned so many topics. They talked about the power of conversation, spirituality in childhood, the need to step into the unknown, and what it means to follow your inner light, whatever that may look like, to do what is right. Here's Nikitu, reflecting on fatherhood and the first moment after his son's birth.
I looked at him and little thing, and I said, what have we done? And then I said, the first question that came to me was my prayer, may he be hungry for the right thing. And I think all of us are, everyone really, deep down is instinctively, intuitively aware of a hunger. And I thought to come to our subject, thinking about it, not to ignore that hunger, but to learn to pay attention to that deep unhappiness, questioning. That's how I see that today. I look back.
We have to be honest about our struggles in faith.
Yeah.
And one of these is to admit that we don't know. I think it's a great danger in faith when we pretend to be certain. It seems to me that faith always involves that risk of stepping into the unknown. We were talking about this at breakfast, and I said, doesn't faith, surely faith is all about opening unmarked doors. You don't know what's the other side of the door. And you open the door and you step through. And he said, yes, it might be into a pile of monkey poo. And yes, there is, and the fact is, there is monkey poo.
And I step in it.
And we step in it. And it's good to remind ourselves of that.
The infectious lightness of a morning spent with Nikitu and Dennis carried us through the rest of the day. Meal times were loud and joyful, conversations in family groups were rich, and gave us the sense that we had indeed formed real, lasting connections in just a few days. Later on, we gathered in the foyer to listen to a stunning musical dialogue by the Ahvan Project. Sitting cross-legged before us with just a guitar and a microphone, they sang deep, spiritual songs and offered spoken word realizations between each one. It was a musical conversation that felt intimate and expansive all at once.
The first song is called Bhooli. It's one of the first songs that we wrote. Bhooli is that sense of being lost. That's why it's called that, because in the very beginning of the journey, and even today after 7 years, I feel like every now and then one comes back to the same feeling of being lost. But I promise you that we will end with joy. My journey started with looking for that deep love we are taught about in school. You know how we're told we are supposed to read these dohas, and in our books we are told about unity and diversity, and we're told about one humanity, and then we go into the real world and we realize none of that is really true. That nobody really believes in it. And so that's where the journey started, and that's why it starts with Bhooli.
Later, there was a screening of the film Beyond Forgiving, directed by participant Imad Karam. Sachi Manyar then led us through another session of creative conversations, in which participants created prayer mandalas and wrote out their intentions for the world. We followed our afternoon of art, films, and music with a hike to Tableland, the beautiful plateau where participants got to take pictures together and watch the sun set over the rolling hills of Panchgani.
In our final session of the day, Community Conversations, as moderated by Anjali Gandhi, we heard from Justin Lakra from Assam, who was born into conflict and spent many years in a relief camp before enrolling as a journalism student in MSU. We then heard from Sushobha Barve, an author, peace builder, with a lifelong association with IFC, who spoke to us about her lifetime of experience in conflict transformation in Kashmir.
I felt I was different. I was not like them, the mob. I was different. I tried to dissociate myself from them. Then I felt that was not fair. I was representative of my community. I happened to be on the train. I witnessed what happened. So the thought came, if when upheavals happen in any society or in any country, there are many contributors to preparation of that upheaval, creation of that upheaval. And if that is the case, if there are many who contribute to that upheaval, then perhaps we as individuals can also help in mending and repairing what has completely broken down.
It's like this year. We tell each other the stories of our hardest, most disconnected moments, and then how we've reflected during these times and come out the other side as more empathetic, truth-centered people. In doing this, we acknowledge the messiness of humanity and our ability to always come back to goodness.
हर नाम में तू समा रहा। तेरी बात पाक कुरान में, तेरा दरस वेद पुराण में। तेरी बात पाक कुरान में, तेरा दरस वेद पुराण में। गुरु ग्रंथ जी के बखान में तू प्रकाश अपना दिखा रहा। तू ही राम है, तू रहीम है, तू करीम कृष्ण खुदा हुआ। तू ही वाहे गुरु, तू है यीशु मसीह, प्रतिनाम में तू समा रहा। अरदास है कहीं कीर्तन, कहीं राम धुन, कहीं आवाहन। अरदास है कहीं कीर्तन, कहीं राम धुन, कहीं आवाहन।
On the final day of Emergent Futures, participants gathered in the early morning for a multi-faith prayer led by Damko Wangyal. Seated around Asia Plateau's sunlit Mami room, participants offered prayers from the Hindu, Islam, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, and secular faiths. We then moved into our wrap-up plenary, where we heard from Dr. Ravindra Rao, IFC elder, trustee and former director here at Asia Plateau, about his experience with the Naxalites in Jamshedpur. We also heard from Sachi Maniar, director of Ashiana Foundation, who spoke about her work with incarcerated children. We heard words of wisdom from writer and director Pakhi Tayarwala, and we also got to hear powerful reflections from her husband Abbas Tayarwala, a distinguished screenwriter, lyricist and director. And finally, we heard from Dr. Sunil Kaul, someone who has dedicated his life to the betterment of the people in the northeast of India, about his journey through truth, hope, and faith.
For our final session, we gathered together in a circle and reflected on the question, where do we go from here? The answers that followed were as multidisciplinary as the people in the room, with reflections taking the shape of poems, of musings from journal pages, and even a charades performance from Tsundu. And it seemed there was a pattern. Not a single person spoke about their next steps without first mentioning the ways that they'd been inspired by everyone present.
Emergent Futures was a gathering of people across disciplines, cultures, ages, religions, and life experiences. Upon first glance, it would be difficult to see the common ground between us all. But sit down at a table, pour yourself a chai, and allow yourself to lean into the power of conversation. This was a space that asked participants to enter without expectation and allow for emergence, in both micro and macro ways. The same participants who spoke in plenaries in the morning showed up to wash dishes with the moshis in the evening. Alarms were set early every day to get out in nature and look inward. 20-year-olds and 80-year-olds alike swayed to the same music and laughed at the same jokes. Over the course of 5 days, through this journey of reality, hope, and faith, there was a healing of hearts and a strengthening of conviction. The organizers behind the conference were a group of curious, justice-seeking people from all over the world: India, Kenya, Canada, the United States, Greece. A group of people who sculpted this journey with the intention of building a container. Not a guide, not a lesson, but a container to hold whatever may emerge when so many different kinds of change makers and storytellers gather in a room. So let us end as it began, with a prayer.
This is one of my favorite poems. It's called I Double Dare You, and it's by Pavi Mehta. The edges of the things are always deceptive because we are taught to believe in endings and beginnings. But the truth is there are no borders, and all boundaries are lines drawn in the imagination. like the equator. People like to put things in their places. We believe in belonging somewhere. This is the problem with poetry. It does not understand belonging, and it will not be put in place. With crayons on paper, maybe, but who can live life strictly inside the lines? The color of countries that cannot be contained in cliches, where the red of your heart spills into the red of the rose, spills into the red of the sunset, spills into the mehndi on the hand of a bride. And who can explain these things? But what I want to know is simple. Who settled the sky on top of the mountain, and who drew the restless margins of the sea? Everything flows into everything else, like a picture drawn without once lifting pencil from paper. This world. Now tell me the story of your life, whoever you are. Go on. I double dare you. Tell me the story of your life without once touching mine.
Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Initiatives of Change India and is the Report for Emergent Future, Reimagining Our World Together, held from the 18th to the 22nd of January 2024 at Asia Plateau, Panchgani, India. The podcast was conceived, designed, written, and edited by Tessa Muck and Abril Suvarso Rivera. It was a jam-packed 5-day gathering, and not everything can be represented, and so please forgive us our misses. I'd also like to thank Siddharth Singh, Director of Asia Plateau and Resident Trustee of Initiatives of Change India, who helped organize this event along with me, Archana, and a formidable group of volunteers. I'd like to name them. Abril Suvarso Rivera, Aditya Harsh Pandit, Anand Sadana, Akash Nikam, Anjali Gandhi, Devika Sivakumar, Dora Lee, Nikhil Ramawat, Preeti Kaur, Sanket Mani, Stefania Menezes, Tessa Muck, Thuguri Vashira, Vicky Wankade, Vikas Miraj, and Damko Wangil. Silvia Zuba Fund and IFC India Trust and participants helped in supporting the costs of running this gathering. If you have any questions, please do write to us at emergentfuture@iofc.org.